So I'm coming in from Portland, Oregon-ish, and I'm pretty excited. Put mine in. Jet lagged. Okay. Sorry about that. Hopefully it was a good trip, Julia. Hey, Erica. Erica and I were just talking yesterday. Give people some time to come on through. How many people do we have so far?
Says we have about 12. I wonder if people are
Okay.
having trouble getting on.
Oh, maybe. I think there's close to 100 who registered from what I heard.
Yeah.
If you're just joining us, go ahead and say where you're coming in. Ah, okay, right after lunch. That makes sense. Yep. Sherry's also from Massachusetts. We got 14 so far. Sorry for you on time people, but if you if you want to put anything in the chat about what you're curious about today or what you want for, a holiday gift, I'm not going to get it for you, but if you want to start tracking your list, that is okay. Hey, Maryland. Hi, Lisa. Medford. Hi, Ashley. Getting more people in. Nice to see your faces. What is the weather like in near Tufts today in Massachusetts?
Cold.
Hey.
Sunny but chilly.
Okay. It's kind of the same here, yeah. Hello from California. I'm sure it's a little warmer there. It's really quite irritating, like places that are balmy year round. I mean, come on, they're not shoveling snow, no ice.
They should have to suffer with us.
That's what I'm thinking, yes. Here in the West Coast, you have to have multiple versions of raincoats, right? You have to have like your dress raincoat, your really light raincoat for the summer, the one you can layer under, right? It's a whole thing. Different colors. Finally stopped raining. Oh, it was raining in near LA. Okay, I have a little Schadenfreude about that. Schadenfreude, I don't know how to say that word, but that German word that means you're slightly glad for someone else's distress. So,
All right, what do you think, Becky? Should we get started?
yeah, why don't we give it one more minute, Gus? How many
Okay.
people we got so far? We got 15. I'm going to go back and share my screen. Okay. Yeah, let's do it. All
Okay. All
right.
right.
Here we
So I
are.
can pull up my intro here.
Okay, go for it.
All right. So hello everyone. As you can see, I'm not Nicole Anderson. She usually runs these events. My name is Gus Tringali, and I recently started this year working with Nicole. I'm on Alumni Career Services. So I'm stepping in today. So welcome to today's webinar, The Courage to Speak Up, How Women Can Find Their Voice. So we have several goals in Tufts Alumni Career Services. We present programs like this, including webinars and networking events, and other events across the country for all alumni, all schools. So please check the Alumni and Friends calendar. Our second goal is to foster connections between alumni and students. We work together with our campus partners like the Tufts University College's Center for Professional and Workforce Impact that offers high quality programs designed to help you advance, change, or explore new career options. Lastly, alumni should check out their school's career center. And I will add links and resources to the chat. Now, for today's webinar, this will be we'll be presenting for about 50 minutes today, and we have a jam-packed session. So we will We can actually take questions throughout. If you just leave them in the chat or if you want to come off mute, that works too. We will be recording this webinar and it will be posted on our YouTube playlist. I should be able to get that out by the end of this week. Finally, before I introduce our speaker, I want to acknowledge the Office of Alumni Engagement's Community Values Statement, which I will post in the chat box after I'm done reading it out. Tufts Office of Alumni Engagement Community Values. So our mission invokes an environment of mutual respect, free expression, and inquiry. Program participants accept these principles when they join this community. In doing so, they agree to abide by the following community values: respect for the rights, differences, experiences, and dignity of others. Two, express our viewpoints in a thoughtful and respectful manner. And three, honesty and integrity in working with all members of the community for accountability for personal behavior. And finally, let me introduce our presenter today. Becky Farone, founder of Fireworks Coaching, spent over 30 years in tech, often as the only woman in the room. She began her career at Microsoft on the original Outlook team and later led successful initiatives at Nike, Starbucks HQ, Kaiser, and Columbia Sportswear. In 2021, she shifted to career coaching to improve work experiences, helping professional women over 40 navigate career transitions with design thinking, feminism, and thought work. Becky is an adjunct career advisor at MIT Sloan, speaks to corporate women's groups, and holds a BA from Tufts and a master's in information design and business from Carnegie Mellon. Now I will hand the presentation over to Becky.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Every time I do this, I realize I forgot some of my Tufts swag that I got from reunion last spring. So anyways, just imagine I'm holding my little Tufts water bottle. So it's nice to see some familiar faces and see some names. So you may have maybe even came to this one before. The last time I did this was last February, but the world has shifted a lot since then, I think. And I wanted to update some of the things we're talking about here. And some of them don't need any updating because they're still true. So let's go ahead and get into it. So as Gus said, that 30-year number is really daunting, but here it is. So I've had a lot of experience, some of it good, some of it bad. And I've been kind of shifting what I offer into people in my business. So not only do I continue to work with folks privately, but I'm also starting to get into working with leaders and organizations. And the way I define leadership is very simple. So it's not just a title. You don't have to be bestowed with like a director, senior manager, whatever, by anybody else. It's actually a personal practice. I mean, it's nice if you have those things, but whether you're leading a global team or leading yourself through some sort of transition, it really starts inside. It's the quieting your mental noise, trusting your own compass, and really speaking with grounded confidence. And that's the heart of what we're doing here today. And that brings me to something I see over and over in my coaching work. So all three of these folks, or 2 out of 3, actually happen to be Tufts alumni. But every person I talk to, in some way, shape, or form, regardless of sort of the outside circumstances that might have inspired them to seek out coaching, the through line is really the same. People want self-belief and confidence, whether it's recovering confidence, building more. We're just not the same people we were when we graduated from Tufts. Even if it was from a grad degree and it was only a couple of years ago, we're always constantly shifting, and the world acts on us to dim our light sometimes. So this concept of having self-belief and confidence is not performative. It's really, we want to get to a place of having grounded self-authority. And speaking up is one of the biggest places that can be tested. So here is what we're doing today. We're going to talk about some of the dynamics. And sometimes when I do this talk, there's men here too. So nothing I say is meant to be like only woman, only woman. It's just that it's mostly women who are impacted by a lot of the ways that the culture in the world has told women how we should behave. I absolutely have had men in my practice who struggled speaking up too, but it's just a little different for women, I think. So, and we're also going to talk about the different kinds of speaking up situations. So This talk is mostly probably centered around the workplace, but it's not just work. It's relationships. It could be like in medical situations. Yeah, I've had my own share of going to see doctors who treated me like a child. What about car buying, right? I remember going to buy a car when I was, I think, 22, 23, and the salesperson thinking it was like okay to say, here's this giant number for the interest on your car loan. I mean, I was lucky in that moment. I was like, this doesn't sound right. And I said no. But there's a lot of times that we need to speak up beyond just career. So some of you might have heard or seen this story, but this is kind of my perspective of speaking up about just asking. It hasn't always worked, but here's some cases where it did. So keep in mind, as Gus said, I was kind of raised in an unconventional environment in Vermont. So I don't think I got as much of the social programming that a lot of women do. I had parents that were specifically kind of anti-authority. So be that as it may. But so I initially was hired to do something at Microsoft that I wasn't even remotely qualified for. I like to say I'm the most technical art history major you will ever meet. Everyone around me were computer science majors, but I followed my mom when she moved from Vermont, where I grew up, to Seattle, and I needed a job. I needed a place to live too. So I first tackled the second one, and the guy whose apartment I was looking at said he worked at campus recruiting at Microsoft. So I brought my resume. That's how I got into Microsoft. And then once I was there, I was like, huh, this is kind of interesting. They're starting this new process, this new database to keep track of all the student hires. I want to do that. I asked for it and I got that too. And so then I was able to figure out who's hiring these new graduates. Maybe I can be one of them. And another process, multiple rounds of I'm just going to ask ensued. So that's how I ended up at Microsoft and discovering this program management job, which is actually product management in other companies. And somebody brought me in to do this on the first version of Outlook. So it wasn't that I was a perfect candidate at every step, but I asked. So let's keep going here. Let's talk about the downside. This is a representative picture, not literally what happened, but of my first experience with my method, my approach of just asking backfired. So mid-20s, gonna go rent an apartment, not with the guy who worked at Microsoft. And the owner, the landlord said, hey, the place is ready. And I go inside and this is what I see, a broken toilet. So I come back out and I talk to him, and I was shocked that he was shocked that I was like, I can't move in there. And I think there's some phrase around, Missy I remember being part of the conversation. But this guy was very shocked that I pushed back on what he said. So this is another example of speaking up, the challenges, the wins and the downsides of not just being in the workplace. So it's got its challenges. So let's talk about what to do about that. Okay, before we do that, let's get your voice in the room here. So if you can think of one moment, you're welcome to come off mute or look at the chat. So at some point this year in 2025, when you decided to speak up or not. So what shaped that choice? What happened? I'm going to take a sip of my coffee and see if anyone wants to chime in. And if you want to think about it a little bit, we can come back to this too, but I'll give you a minute. Anybody? Bueller? No? I'm not sure if 2025 is the safest environment for speaking up, actually. That is not a core topic for today, but I'm wondering if that's what some of you might be thinking, because I am. I am thinking about that. I still think there are places to practice this, though. So if anyone wants to think of something and come back to this, we can do that. So I'm going to go ahead and move
We have
on.
Julia
Oh,
saying in the chat,
oh,
I didn't speak up because a more senior colleague
ooh,
suggested I didn't.
ooh, Julia, can you either type or say more about that?
Um, it was a situation where I went to a more senior colleague who I'm very friendly with and said, "How do you feel? What would you suggest?" And um, for various reasons, we agreed to not.
Okay. Yeah, don't share anything that's confidential, but how did you feel about that agreement?
I think there's definitely an element of mm, like affirmation that comes with seeking out the guidance of a sort of friend and colleague, and for me, a level of frustration
Mm.
that 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 I had with that final outcome, but also like appreciation for the sort of the safety that steered me towards.
Mm. Okay. That is an interesting point, though, because we're going to talk about safety quite a bit more in the next couple slides. So I get that. I get that. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I was trying to think if there's one that I did speak up or didn't on any particular situation. Running my own business, I don't run into this too much. I will tell you, on a personal note, there are times when I am either careful or decide not to, in the moment, speak up maybe with my husband because anyone in a relationship knows that being hot-headed doesn't always work, rarely works. So those are some of maybe my own personal experiences in this past year. Maybe saying less on social media too. All right, so here's what we're doing today. We're talking about self-authority. This is what gives you the courage to speak. So we talked about how leadership really begins inside, and self-authority is that foundation. And once you can trust that what you do, say, or think is fine with you, this gives you a lot of even more freedom and security to speak up and have the life and career that you want. So we're going to talk about how to claim this self-authority today and really, but be prepared. Let's see. Is this too negative? I don't know. I'm pretty realistic. But kind of arm yourself for the battle, right? There's eons of cultural forces pushing back on women really getting to that full self-authority. And there's a lot of research out there. We're going to talk about some of that, about, the pros and cons of women speaking up at work. So here's one data point from McKinsey from a couple years ago. Others get credit for women's ideas 1.5 times more often than that happens to men. So that sucks. And that's one of the things we can do together as, supporting each other. You've probably come across this concept of going into a meeting maybe, and, maybe even planning ahead with another woman or another person who might be shy, right? Introverted, and saying, hey, if you say this, I'm going to back you up. So that's just one of the techniques you can use here. All right. So what is self-authority? Um, this might seem overly simple, but it's a kind of, these 3 lines are a state that I aspire to, but it might be easier to say what it's not. So let's talk about some examples. So as I've hinted, it's not necessarily a lack of self-authority that we might innately have, but it comes from how women have been socialized. So, and when your automatic internal thoughts from the socialization keep you small, which is so common for so many of us, then it's hard to think that, oh, I should speak up, because it hasn't been something that's been celebrated. So some examples, right? So maybe being afraid to argue a point in a meeting because maybe you are telling yourself you don't know enough, or you're worried you might get criticized. Constantly being worried about your appearance, and even worse, ending up with an eating disorder. This is part of this too. Maybe sometimes it's happened that feeling completely gaslit by leaders at work and blaming yourself for missing something. I've actually heard this quite a bit from my clients, but you know what actually happened. But it doesn't feel safe to speak up and contradict. So I like to tell the story of a very definitive moment of self-authority I experienced a couple years ago. So I was working at a big tech company, not going to say which one. It's not any of the ones that Gus shared with you. And there's so much turmoil. Leaders were leaving and getting fired, and a new leader came in, and she hadn't hired me, and I kind of had like an unusual job, and she didn't like me because I asked questions. So things seemed really shaky, and my usual approach of just asking was backfiring. And it really led to one of the most toxic work experiences of my life, right? So my job was going to go away. This leader made up several completely untrue things that were contradicted by my actual peers. And so, kind of long story short, I had a clear moment one day of like, I'm just not going to play this game for any longer. And I was able to get severance out, but that was the last time I blindly trusted that leaders had a plan and were acting rationally. I mean, they're human too, but I stopped imbuing them with this quality, and it opened the door to claiming my own self-authority, and not only at work but in other areas as well. So I've been talking for a while. Does anybody want to throw anything out that might be similar or different, or any of these lines on the slide inspire a thought? It's okay if you don't want to add something. I just like to give people the opportunity. So, all right. This week before Thanksgiving is a little rough, isn't it? Oh yeah, go ahead, Carol.
Well, politics. I mean,
Yeah,
I think that people are finally seeing through all the lies and everything and
I
being
hope.
willing to speak up, which
Yeah,
wasn't happening so much before this year.
I agree. I agree that's true. It's hard not to see them. And Erica, in the chat, you said you can relate to the story. Is there anything else you want to add? You don't have to.
Sure. I mean, I just remember asking a question, volunteering to help with a new process where we were going to automate this system for sending emails to students. And I volunteered to learn how to do it. And I crafted this very careful email to my supervisor about how important it was. And I was willing to take the time to learn how to do it. And he got very angry with me because he said, "That is not what I asked you to do. All I asked
Wow.
you to do was make a list of the possible ways that we could use this new system. I did not ask you to volunteer to learn how to do it." And that felt really hard because, right, like you, I
Yeah.
was just curious. I was asking questions. I wanted to volunteer. I wanted to help, and he just shot me down.
Wow. Okay. Well, as we go through some of the things you might want to do to counteract these things, I'd be curious to come back to you, Erica, and see if, in hindsight, what you would have wanted to do differently or not. So thank you for sharing. And I'm sorry you went through that, and that sounds very distressing. All right, so let's talk about what is the problem. So it's really common to be afraid to speak up. We've been already talking about some of this to a certain extent, right? Socialization, but really for much of history, women were property. We had almost no power or resources, right? Men were bigger. We had no income. Like, what are we going to do about it if we did speak up? And doing what others wanted us to do kept us safe. So this became very ingrained in our brains over generation, right? Be nice or else. And then even today, on a more extreme level than speaking up at work, many women fear for their lives if they do or say something small to upset a violent partner, which is not at all what I was talking about earlier with my own husband, not at all the same situation. But we do end up fearing punishment, whether we're aware of it or not, in many forms if we speak up in what should be safe environments, right? Speaking in front of people. How about the word bossy? Anyone ever been called bossy? Hello, right here. Also, I'm the older sister, so I think from the moment my brother was born, a bitch, not qualified, overbearing, too much. That's my favorite. Not really, but that one is so vague, right? Who am I too much for? Clearly you, right? The proverbial you. So it's really hard to tell, though, coming back to this fear about what is real or imagined. And we become inhibited internally and externally. So the fear is real historically and neurologically, but today I want to focus on how we can move through that fear some more. Before we get there, a few more things. So here's what happens when women don't speak up, right? We've been talking about some of these, even the screenshot of a book I was reading recently, which says she understood right away that when a woman is not in her place, men can get very angry. I think I was reading a book on my Kindle that was not current day, but it seems like that could actually happen in multiple time frames in our shared experience. So all of these things are probably familiar to you, right? The financial impact wage gap, I'm going to share some statistics on that. And there's been an update in some of the research you may have heard me share before about negotiation and communication. But before I do that, another statistic related to this interrupted cutoff bullet point here. It's not funny. It's just like kind of like if you're not laughing, you're crying funny. So there was a 2023 study analyzing over 24,000 US congressional committee hearings, and it found that women legislators in Senate committees are about 10% more likely than their male peers to be interrupted. And when the topic was a woman's issue, they're more than twice as likely to be interrupted. And that was not in the current administration. So that's kind of shocking. So it's no wonder that so many women and a lot of men, at least 90% of those in my current coaching practice, feel some form of imposter syndrome, which is a very broad term that is, if we're feeling like we're not good enough or we're too scared to speak up. And so what's really interesting, though, is new research this year talks that it changes the old women don't ask story. So let's go to there next. So let's bring up the first one. Everything in blue is the new research from Harvard in 2024 using MBA grads. So just keep that in mind. So women now negotiate more than men. I was a little surprised to read this the other day. I'm happy to hear it. It's something that has really changed since, let's see, I don't remember the exact date of the previous research I was sharing, but it's good news in general until you get to this. So women are still earning less than men, especially, and it keeps dropping by year 10. After this particular study, again, was MBA grads. And so the issue isn't necessarily whether you ask or not, it's the response. Still backlash, smaller increases in long-term pay penalties. So one of the things you can actually play around with their experiment is like, what would it be like if you negotiated on behalf of somebody else before you negotiated for yourself? So I've actually done that in the workplace. I wasn't trying to game this sociological phenomenon here at the time, but it was helpful. And then salary expectations. So women expect or accept 3 to 30% less compensation than men. I have a link to this study in the resources slide later too. So, and this is why self-authority and courageous clarity matter, not to fix yourself, but to navigate environments in our world that still respond unevenly. So any thoughts about the statistics, particularly the very first one? That women now negotiate more often than men. Have any of you recently? What was that experience like? All right, we'll keep going. I've actually had, I remember more than once in my previous salary type job of being told we don't negotiate here. And both of those times there were women leaders telling me that. Now there's so many different factors that go into this. It's not just one. Sometimes some organizations will be like, what do you want to make? We'll just give that to you. But if they don't expect you to come back and negotiate, that's kind of strange too. So yeah, always negotiate. Okay, let's go to the next one here. So let's talk about this concept called double bind. So women and other underrepresented groups walk a much narrower line between competence and warmth. So you can see that here in the slide. So this is the definition of the double bind. You're either considered completely competent or warm. It's hard to be both as a woman in this world. And this goes back to like the beginning of people. So at the core of this is status. High status groups, usually men, are assumed to be both capable and likable. Lower status groups, women, underrepresented groups, often have to prove both right from the start. It's not just assumed. We do a lot of work. And so what happens is when women show competence, it can be read as unlikable. Hillary Clinton, right? When we show warmth, it can be read as less competent. Can't think of a good example right now, but I'm sure all of us have run into this at some point. So, and this quote from Alison Fergal, she's written a book called Likeable Badass, also in the resources. Excellent book. She's a social scientist. She's kind of colleagues with Adam Grant, if you've heard of that person who does a lot of workplace research. And she says, women are not penalized for the presence of assertiveness. They are penalized for the absence of warmth. And that's the context we're, trying to speak up or speak into in 2025. But we can do things that intentionally signal both assertiveness or being capable, capability, sorry, not enough coffee, capability and caring. And once you are noticing this pattern, you can actually do more to kind of navigate it rather than feeling squeezed by it. So, okay, bye, Julia. All right. So here's a little bit more about what happens inside our own brains around this. So it's not just what others might say about us that holds us back. We also say a lot of these things to ourselves. So on this slide, the dark boxes are things people might actually say, sometimes out loud, sometimes in our imagination. The white boxes are things that we whisper to ourselves before we've even opened our mouths. Has anyone said any of these things to themselves in the white, in a workspace? You can give me a thumbs up, or I'm actually not quite seeing everybody. Let's pull this out here. Yep, Anna. Okay, anybody else? I definitely have. Yeah, okay.
I just feel like there's always, I always think I'm too much. So when I try not, I try to pull back, and
Yeah.
then it's always too little. I'm like, can I just be like, I
Oh.
feel like you're always oscillating between being too much and
Right.
too little. There's never, I feel like you never win that battle.
Yeah, yep. So what do you say to yourself though when you kind of see that it's a hard to win situation?
Well, if I am confident in myself, I have greater contribution to the conversation, and perhaps I'm considered to be too much. But the flip side is that there'll be like, well, she's nice, but she doesn't know what she's doing. So that's sort of the other the other side of the coin is that it's, how do you show that you know what you're doing without then taking over and being aggressive?
Yeah. It's quite the tightrope, isn't it, Susan?
It is. You're always sort of like, don't shake the apple cart too
I
much,
know.
but then also make sure that you establish that you could be the CEO if tapped one day.
Right. Well, I'm not just going to talk about a big problem and leave you hanging. So we're going to get there. But I did want to point out, and thank you, Susan, for sharing that. But what's also happening in these boxes is there's negativity bias. So you've probably heard about this, but we're wired as humans from the beginning of humans to scan for threat, right? Tiger behind the bush. And we've been socialized to think we don't know enough or we're too much, like Susan was talking about. But here's something you can consider as a reframe. What people say usually tells you more about them than about you. Right? It's big nod from Susan. A lot of what you hear, real or imagined, is actually somebody else's fear or insecurity landing on you. Pretty unpleasant, actually. But when you remember that, that's another kind of sign that you can be slipping into this concept of self-authority, and you can speak up from a grounded place, not a defensive one. So there's a lot of things to try to remind ourselves. One of my big mottos in my coaching practice is small, safe experiments. So that's a good segue to talk about. Let's talk about our toolkit. And these aren't the only things in the world you can do, but these are things that I always try to make these concrete so you can walk away with something really specific. So let's talk about this. So let's go back to the double bind, right? We want to be assertive enough to show capability and warm enough to foster connection and trust. And the different ways you can do that are really taking control of managing our status, which is what's underneath those two things, as we look for opportunities to signal I'm capable and I'm caring. Though some of the things I'm going to talk about in just a minute are more of an inside game than outside. They're both important. So let's talk about this one first. So when we talk about speaking up, one of the biggest obstacles isn't out there. It's in here. And if you've been to last month's or heard about last month's positive intelligence webinar, which we go really deep into talking about these inner critics. We all have them. We all have the judge as the master inner critic, and then we all have our own kind of different flavors of the 9 accomplice saboteurs. So the first thing to do is just really recognize that these voices that show up. And if you want to know what yours are, I think it's a link in the resources, but I'm not sure, but I can always send that out later. So it's just a very short assessment that will tell you what yours are. So it's the first, like I said, it's really recognizing these inner voices, and they aren't you, like the core you, they're learned responses. The original intent of these inner voices came about when you're quite young, and they were meant to keep you safe. And we just, nobody had much power when we were young kids. And this is the only way we generally thought we could get that. But now they become habits that can hold you back from things you really want, whether that's speaking up or just feeling peaceful during the day. Dear Lord, right? Who needs to be yelling at ourselves all day long? You didn't go to the gym. You didn't go to the gym. You didn't go to, right? That's mine in the moment. So now we turn this criticism into courage, and we get curious. So what is this voice afraid of? What does it want you to know? What might be possible if you spoke up when you're afraid anyway? And maybe that voice is just saying, wait till Tuesday, the boss is in a better mood, whatever it is. But one of my favorite questions to ask myself and my clients is, what would you do if you were 10% braver? I'll let that sink in for a second. What would you do if you're 10% braver about speaking up or about anything else? If anyone wants to plop something in the chat, you may. So while people might be thinking about that, so the thing is to, acknowledge these inner critics. I had a client yesterday called them inner demons, which is kind of funny, but also not, because they're a part of us. You don't need to call them names, right? You want to not let them control your life, but you also want to kind of say, oh, I hear you, something's going on. When we want to make change in our lives, these voices get very loud. But, the final one here, underscoring that point, is talking about compassion. So if a friend came to you and said, oh my God, I'm so afraid to speak up in a meeting, or I have to get a new car, I'm petrified, whatever it is, it doesn't just have to be about speaking up. You would be kind to that friend. You would support that friend. So that's what I'm saying. Let's do that for ourselves too. Any questions, thoughts before I move on? And I can't see if anyone's got their hand up because I'm only looking at a couple people, but okay. Gus didn't tell me. All right, let's look at strategy number 2. So this is about rewriting the good girl narrative. Most of us grew up with this, right? School in particular teaches us to look to teachers and authority figures, our parents, other people's parents, for the answers, and to assume that we know less or that our opinion counts less. Having trouble talking today. But what helped you succeed in school, like waiting for this direction, looking to others for answers, trying to be whoever the job interviewer wants and needs you to be, even if you don't totally know what that is, that doesn't support the kind of leadership that we defined at the beginning, right? So, and leadership is deciding what's important and, true for you. So that's really important to be acting from your values and not someone else's rules. So going back to the job interview situation, that new job's got to work for you too. Virtually all of us forget that because we're like performing in that moment. If I say the right thing and answer the right questions, they'll like me and they'll give me the job. So yes, we do all need money to support our lives, but trying to be who you're not for somebody else can be a real disaster in many situations, not just the work. So the first thing is we question authority mindfully. So not necessarily with blame, but with curiosity. Like if someone says, Erica, if I can use you as an example, what you just shared a minute ago. So what was true for Erica in that moment, I'm just going to extrapolate, is that, hey, this is cool. I get to learn something new. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so what was happening with the boss's, the authorities' backlash there was something that was impacting him had nothing to do with Erica. So it was a shitty experience. I'm sorry you went through that, but what he was experiencing wasn't actually true for you. So that's in a way to kind of hold your ground, at least internally. So evaluating the authority, like, do you want to take it in and decide something must be wrong with me or not? That's part of your own authority to say, I can either take this in or not. So kind of moving on is defining leadership on your own terms. You don't have to lead exactly like your manager, that other manager, that principal, or some other parent in the PTA, right? I had a client who was a senior HR director, and we were working together, and she said, I just feel like I'm not like the other people on the leadership team. I was like, well, who says you have to be? So that just that question right there kind of really opened up a whole new conversation. And one of her answers was, I'll keep going, is she's like, I'm pretty introverted. I don't like to jump in a lot in the meetings or when people ask me direct questions. I said, okay, what if you just said, that's a great point. I'll get back to you after the meeting, and really bought yourself that introvert thinking time that a lot of people need. Like, not everyone's going to be able to respond off the top of their head, and you shouldn't have to. So if you just able to claim that time for yourself, it's another example. And then what does leadership mean to you? Who do you admire and why, right? What kind of leader do you think is a really great leader? I don't know this guy's name, but I'm remembering the guy who's the CEO and founder of like Patagonia. A lot of people seem to kind of uh, really respect him because of his values. And do you know, I see you nodding, Gus. Do you know the name of that guy?
I don't know the name of the guy, but I know he's led a lot of conservation efforts.
Exactly. So a lot of people really respect that he's been able to kind of be in the world of commerce, yet also be in the world of saving the world, essentially. So it's really, this is an exercise I often give to my clients of like, let's find some people that you really admire and decide for yourself, though. You don't have to be exactly like them. We're talking about self-authority. And then the third one here is really owning your expertise and making it visible. So there's some really great books, again, on my resource list, but there's a book called Brag Better by Meredith Feynman. And she says a lot of people fall into this category of being quietly qualified, right? We do good work, everybody will notice, I'll get a promotion, life will be grand. Yeah, that doesn't always happen. It doesn't mean you have to go to the other extreme of showing up at every meeting and taking all the air in the room either. So I think a lot of us, particularly women, think that there's only those two options, but there's actually ways to brag better. So here's an example. You can brag and thank. I know I think it was the Alison Fergal book about Likeable Badass. She talks about one tactic could be, hey, you send out a short little newsletter to your team every week and say, hey, we did some really great things. I want to thank so-and-so. We got further on this thanks to the efforts of Mary or what have you. So there's ways to kind of follow your own values of maybe inclusion or collaboration, but also get more visibility. And that goes back to competence and warmth, goes back to combating the double bind. And just going, let's see, I have a lot of things on the slide. Okay, I keep thinking about the end, I'm not. So we talked about your own communication style with my friend who's my coaching client who was more introverted. But you get to respond in the style that reflects who you are. You don't have to yell. You also don't have to be always quiet, but looking for that kind of middle ground that feels authentic to you, but also gets what you want in this world. So there's an element of being realistic as well. And then where the whole point of our meeting today is asking for what you want and deserve. So as Alison Fergal reminds us, at least in the book, I read the whole book, asking is one of the most powerful tools for navigating the double bind and claiming your authority. There are ways to do that to show up as being both competent and warm. All right. I talked a whole lot. We're going to keep going with some more of strategy 2. But before we get to 3, anybody have anything to share? Anything you're curious about? Okay. Let's go on to number 3. So some of these things might look familiar. We all do these kind of hedge words, right? But we're looking for this magical combination of competence and warmth. So these bullet points are a lot of habits that in particular women have picked up to stay safe, right? We learned these on purpose to avoid the backlash of being too direct or too much, but they can unintentionally undermine how competent we sound, right? So hedging with just or bit, apologizing when nothing is actually wrong. That is such a big one for a woman. Ooh, so ingrained. Uptalk. Somebody asked me last time what uptalk is, so I'll just define that. That's often the like, so what should we do in the meeting today, right? Versus what should we do in the meeting? So it's this way of speaking where the second half of your point or your sentence sounds like a question, even if you don't mean it to be. Asking questions instead of making declarations. God, this used to happen to me a lot younger in my career. I would think I was repeating back to someone, active listening. Okay, so what I hear you say is you want this on the website in this font and this color font. And I can't tell you how many times someone would come back to me and say, oh, let me explain that to you again. I'm like, you know, like, no. I'm being polite. I'm being respectful. I'm telling you, I heard you. Oh, I'm thinking of a particular incident right now and I'm mad again. So asking questions instead of making declarations, right? I just said this, like, what should we do in our meeting today? And saying, hey, we're meeting today. I propose we talk about X, Y, and Z. So there's obviously a lot of them here. Oh, speaking too fast because we're worried about taking up space or about being interrupted. Remember the Senate committee? So we often do these things to appear nice, but they can really dilute the strength of our message. So we want to start kind of undermining these and using more declarative language like I recommend, right? Or what do you, instead of like, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? That's a great collaboration technique. There's not anything wrong with it on its own, but what if you experimented with interspersing that with I recommend? How would that feel to you? How would you look to other people? So just some interesting things here. And so the challenge is often we often still do it to appear nice. Just say you've gotten rid of a lot of your habits that don't make you feel as empowered as you know you are inside. But then you find yourself still using them. So I wanted to come up with some ideas here because the reason why we still use a lot of those habits once they're no longer unconscious habits is because still in the world, we're still getting a lot of you're too much, or like what Susan was talking about, right? You're caught between that rock and a hard place. What if you consciously tried out some of these examples here to be heard better and avoid the punishments of being too direct? So, and again, getting back to that, trying to integrate that warmth and confidence. So instead of saying, you know, the first one, I appreciate your perspective, and I have another one to share. So those, a lot of times we end up in meetings where someone is just like, blah, 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 my opinion, and you want to interject. How do you do that and sound confident and warm, right? Or I want to raise, I'm going to negotiate it. And you say something, you've probably heard of this sort of the sandwich method here and there, especially if you're a parent, right? Or borrowing something from improv. What I love about this idea is, and I happen to actually work with someone in my MIT environment who's really good at this, and he's a man. Like I said before, thanks for asking my opinion. If you are called on in a meeting, I do have more to add and I'll respond in email by tomorrow. You can see the other ones here. I really like this last one because you have to be careful with your tone of voice. So I used to be a project program manager and people were constantly trying to screw up, you know, the schedule or something really erratic. A lot of erratic things would happen. So instead of saying like, what the hell are you thinking, people, which is not allowed, unfortunately. I know, Carol, I'm with you. But you can say like, I'm impressed with all the work that's gone into this and I'm curious about that deadline. What are the factors driving it? Right. So there's a lot of way of asking questions that don't, as long as you watch your tone of voice, the tone of voice can clearly say, man, are you an idiot? So you have to watch that. But if you can be authentic about trying to come together with someone, but also being direct and saying, hey, didn't we say this? Maybe something changed. Let me know. So this isn't a script, right? These are just kind of ideas for you. And I don't know if anyone has ever read or heard anything about the Gottmans, the John and Julie Gottman in Seattle, the Love Lab. There's a lot of like couple therapists and stuff use this. And so they have this concept of the soft opening, right? And so that's a lot of what I'm doing here. Instead of saying to your spouse, like, man, there's so many dishes on the counter. What is your problem? You can be like, hey, you know, I really love it when the kitchen is cleaner. It helps me feel calmer. Can we work out a new schedule? So I occasionally struggle with that myself. I'm more of a direct kind of person, having come from the East Coast. Not always appreciated now on the West Coast, but it really is effective. So Anyone want to share an experience? I keep asking you you do not have to jump in. I just want to give people the opportunity. If you want to share anything about what you might have experimented with, what were the results? Maybe you didn't have lunch yet. I'm almost done. Okay. Here's
Well,
oh, go ahead.
I try to dovetail a lot on whatever's being said in meetings to validate if I agree with someone and make the point even more so.
Yeah.
So, and then take it one step further and then open it up broadly so that it's a sandwich, like to your point, it's the feel good sandwich, but it's not, I don't do that to, you know, I would only say if it is genuine to do that. And if it's a real sort of constructive point or not, not to overdo it, not to overuse that tactic, but just an option.
Yeah. And what does it do for you?
Well, I think it validates the person speaking and lets you know that you're listening, because I feel like I get the message all the time as a fundraiser that the most important thing you can do in a conversation is listen. It's even less important what you say. So I'm always being taught, like, listen, you have 2 ears, you have 1 mouth, do things in that, and so I try to do what you're supposed to do and when, if that makes sense. But yeah.
Okay. Is that what you want to do, Susan? I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but I am curious.
I love fundraising.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get back into it. If anyone knows, I know Gus knows. Gus's family, I've talked to about this recently.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I know everyone's trying to help me get back into fundraising.
Yeah. Nice. Oh, I think I meant, is that the approach that you want to take? The listen first, 2 ears, 1 mouth?
Well, in donor visits, I would say that's more often that's more effective.
Yeah.
But in general, I don't think women need to subscribe to that sort of thing. I mean, I think that's true of donor visits, and maybe it extends further.
Yeah. Okay. But I think what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost good to have different like fluencies of how to communicate with people, right? So now on the other hand, that can be a lot of mental and emotional overload for people, especially women, to have like, I'm going to try this language with that person, like language, right?
Yeah.
But it's also good to have the flexibility and, the thoughtfulness to do that, because it's going to get you. I mean, this whole thing is about how do we get what we want in our life and feel better about it. That's the underlying thing here. So, all right, here's the last one here. So finding your voice isn't just about learning to speak up. It's also about learning to take it when others don't like it when you speak up, right? So, keep focusing on the purpose of your vision and really embrace courage and resilience. Like you've probably heard of this phrase, feel the fear and do it anyway. It will get easier, small, safe experiments, and be okay with making a mistake or trying something and it doesn't work. Keep going, just keep going. We're coming back around to time here. So as we wrap up, I want to bring us back to this core belief underneath everything we've talked about today. Self-authority is what gives you the courage to speak. It's not you don't need a title, you don't need permission. It's really how you're relating to your own internal authority is what determines how you show up. And hopefully some of these ideas here will give you new ways to do that, and so that also feel authentic. So I want to leave you with a couple questions here, right? You can put it in chat, you can speak up, you can just journal it later. So what are you taking away today? And more importantly, what will you do next to be heard, right? What's one moment, another way of saying that, big or small, where you could just be 10% braver? Anyone going to try anything? I know some people are interviewing, so I think some of this stuff is going to be very relevant for you, right? What do you need? What needs to be true for you to take this new job, right? Susan, I'm glad that you know what you want to do next, and don't take the next job if someone's an asshole. So
that's a good rule to live by.
yes, exactly. So, So that's how this work starts, right? So not with huge leaps, but with small intentional acts of courage that really build your self-authority over time. So, all right, we're coming around the bend here. I, as usual, want to offer people some time with me if you want to work, maybe you want a little coaching on a high stakes moment or something that you feel is blocking you, maybe it'd be helpful to talk through what like a small script could look like. So I have actually extended. Last time I was doing 30-minute sessions, but I realized they were too short. So I'm offering 8 45-minute sessions. And if you want to scan that QR code, you can just sign up on the sheet that comes up. I'm going to show you the QR code again in a second, so don't worry, but I wanted to share this resource list of everything I've been talking about. Plus, I also used a lot of this to create this presentation. And Gus and I were talking beforehand that we would be happy to send out the resource list and a link to the YouTube recording to everyone who attended today, if that's helpful. So you don't have to worry about writing it all down, though you're free to take a screenshot. And then let's see if there's any final questions here. And there's the free consult again, so.
Yeah, just if you're thinking about questions, I just wanted to share, and in the meantime, if I think you're all going to be taken to a survey right after this Zoom, if you could please fill it out, that would be great. And just to conclude, thank you so much, Becky. That was really inspiring. And I've been to a few of these now, and I always learn something, so I really appreciate it.
Oh,
But
good.
yes, any other questions?
And then I'm actually putting my email in here. If for some reason you had to run or didn't have time to look at your calendar or what have you, I can always share the scheduling information again if you send me a note. Fireworks coaching. Yep. So who wants to take one of these ideas with them? Maybe even into Thanksgiving. Ooh, that'd be fun, right? Which family member do you want to stop just listening to who doesn't give you a chance to talk and say, that is so interesting, but I have to go to the living room now. Speaking up versus getting drunk. That is the Thanksgiving approach. I'm a little cheeky today. Hopefully that's okay for the Tufts alumni. YouTube. You can always cut that part out, Gus, if you need to.
No, I'm sure people will appreciate it.
Okay. Humor is a big part of my approach to life and my business. So all right. Well, we can let people go. And you're very welcome, Ashley. So nice to see everyone's faces today. And just to have everybody who wanted to attend and make this work for you today. I hope it has some good stuff that stays in your mind. So
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, we'll have
Great.
keep an eye out for the next sessions to come in the spring. So,
that
all
sounds
right.
great. Okay. Bye.
Bye.